and hello everyone. Today, we will be presenting a real-world workplace conflict case entitled Intan Suraya Hashim v. Concrete Engineering Products Berhad. This case involves a dispute between an employee and her employer regarding a transfer decision, which later led to a claim of constructive dismissal. Through this presentation, we will examine the conflict from a conflict management and negotiation perspective by looking at the background of the case, analyzing the key issues involved, and discussing possible approaches for resolving such workplace conflicts. Before we move on to the case itself, let us first look at some key concepts that are relevant to our discussion. Before discussing the case, it is important to understand several key concepts related to employment relations. Firstly, workplace conflict refers to disagreements that arise when individuals or groups have different goals, values, perceptions, or interests within an organization. Conflict is often seen as something negative because it can create tension and disrupt work processes. However, when it is managed effectively, conflict can actually bring positive outcomes. For example, it can improve communication among employees, help resolve workplace problems, and encourage organizational learning and development. Since conflict is unavoidable in most organizations, conflict management becomes essential. Conflict management is the process of identifying, handling, and resolving disputes in a constructive manner. According to HRM 2017, its main objectives are to reduce the negative impacts of conflict, promote positive outcomes for all parties, and maintain healthy employment relationships within the organization. Another important aspect of conflict management is negotiation. Negotiation involves communication between the parties involved in a dispute to reach a mutually acceptable solution. Through negotiation, both employers and employees can express their concerns, understand each other's interests, and work toward resolving disagreements before they escalate into more serious conflicts or legal disputes. Another important concept in this report is constructive dismissal. Constructive dismissal occurs when an employee resigns because of the employer's actions. These actions may involve a breach of the employment contract or the creation of intolerable working conditions that make it difficult for the employee to continue working. Although the employee chooses to resign, the resignation is considered involuntary because it results from the employer's conduct. One workplace situation that may lead to conflict and potentially to constructive dismissal is an employee transfer. Generally, employers have the managerial right to transfer employees to meet operational and business needs. However, such transfers must be carried out in good faith, be fair and reasonable, and take into consideration the employee's welfare and rights. When employees perceive a transfer as unfair or unreasonable, conflict may arise between the employer and the employee. The case selected for this report is Intan Suraya Hashim v. Concrete Engineering Products Berhad, Industrial Court Ward number 1315 of 2022. This report aims to analyze the constructive dismissal claim arising from the employee transfer, examine the conflict from the perspectives of conflict management and negotiation, evaluate the strategies used by both parties, and provide recommendations for improving workplace conflict resolution practices.
Assalamualaikum everyone, my name is Nurul Ain binti Rafiee. I will present the case background and context of this case. Okay, the first slide is provide an overview of the conflict between Intan Suraya Hashim and Concrete Engineering Product Berhad or CEPB. Ms. Intan had worked with the company for more than 16 years and held the position of senior account executive. The dispute started when the company instructed her to transfer from the Kuala Lumpur headquarters to the Nilai factory on 15 June 2020. She believed the transfer The transfer was unreasonable, carried out without proper consultation, and significantly changed her long-established working arrangement. However, the company argued that the transfer was necessary for operational purposes and was a legitimate management decision because her salary, benefit, and position remained unchanged. As a result, the main issue brought before the Industrial Court was whether the transfer amounted to constructive dismissal under the Industrial Relations Act 1967. The primary claimant was Ms. Intan Suraya Hashim, a senior account executive with over 16 years of service. Her main interests were job security, workplace stability, and maintaining her long-established work location at the company headquarters. The primary respondent was Concrete Engineering Product Berhad. The company's interests focused on maintaining operational efficiency, improving accounting record at the Nilai factory, and exercising its managerial authority. The secondary parties included the Human Resource Department and the Finance Department leadership. Their responsibility were to implement the transfer process, manage documentation, support management decision, and reduce legal risks. Overall, the conflict arose because the employees sought employment stability while the employer prioritized operational and business needs. The disagreement eventually led to a constructive dismissal claim before the Industrial Court.
Assalamualaikum and hi, my name is Nur Fatihah binti Hassan. For today, I will explain to you on the critical analysis for conflict management strategies employed by HR department on management during that time. Based on the case of Intan Suraya Hashim versus Concrete Engineering Product Berhad, the first conflict management strategy used by management was the transfer decision. The company transferred Ms. Intan from its Kuala Lumpur headquarters to the Nilai factory, claiming that the transfer was necessary for operational needs. According to DASA 2020, employers have the right to transfer employees, but this right must be exercised reasonably and fairly. However, Ms. Intan viewed the transfer as unfair and punitive rather than a normal business decision. This damaged the relationship of mutual trust and confidence, which eventually led to her constructive dismissal claim. The second strategy was management's reliance on good faith and business justification. The company argued that the transfer was based solely on business requirements and not intended to penalize the employee. Although this aligned with Armstrong and Taylor, who emphasized fairness and legitimate business reasons, management failed to communicate the decision transparently. As a result, the employee lost trust in the organization and conflict escalated. In this slide, it shows that the third strategy was communication with the employee. In the Intan Suraya Hashim case, management mainly used one-way communication approach by informing Ms. Intan after the transfer decision had been made. Although she raised her concern, there was no meaningful consultation before implementation. Robin Judge and Campbell 2018 explained that effective conflict management requires two-way communication to ensure employees feel heard and treated fairly. The lack of consultation during reduced procedural fairness and worsened their conflict. As the internal strategy failed, the dispute was brought before the Industrial Court. The court ruled the company had constructively dismissed Ms. Intan because the transfer was handled unfairly. According to NOI ETL 2023, organizations should use alternative dispute resolution methods such as mediation or negotiation before conflict escalates to the litigation. This case shows that fair communication and early conflict resolution are essential to maintaining trust and avoiding costly legal disputes. In conclusion, the Intan Suraya Hashim case demonstrates that although management relied on transfer, business justification, communication, and legal process to manage the conflict, the lack of fairness consultation and employee trust caused this strategy to fail and ultimately led to constructive dismissal. Thank you.
As Fatihah has just explained, management adopted several strategies to handle the conflict. However, identifying the strategies alone is not enough. It is equally important to evaluate whether those strategies were actually effective in resolving the conflict. Assalamualaikum. My name is Nurul Nissa binti Hassan. In this section, I will evaluate the effectiveness of management's approach, analyze whether it escalated or de-escalated the conflict, and discuss how the conflict could have been managed more effectively. Based on the first section of this slide, we can evaluate management's approach by looking at the different perceptions between management and the employee. As Ain explained earlier, management believed the transfer was necessary to meet the company's operational needs. Therefore, from management's perspective, it was a legitimate business decision. However, the employee viewed the transfer as unreasonable and believed that it negatively affected her employment. As a result, she felt that her concerns were not properly considered. According to Conliffe 2016, conflict occurs when people perceive that their goals and interests are being threatened. In this case, both parties interpreted the same transfer decision differently, and these different perceptions became the main cause of the conflict. I believe the management's approach was not entirely effective because the disagreement was not resolved internally and eventually progressed to the industrial court. Next, using Conliffe's conflict process model, we can see how the conflict developed. It began at the perception stage when the employee believed the transfer would negatively affect her employment. It then moved to the realization stage, where both parties recognized that they had different interests regarding the transfer. As the issue remained unresolved, the conflict reached the flashpoint stage, where tensions increased before filing a formal dispute through a constructive dismissal claim at the industrial court. This shows that the conflict escalated instead of being resolved through internal communication. It is also important to distinguish between a conflict and a dispute. A conflict is an ongoing disagreement between parties, while a dispute occurs when the disagreement becomes formal and openly contested. This case clearly demonstrates that progression. Moving on to this slide, I will analyze the conflict management strategy used by management. The management mainly relied on its managerial authority when making the transfer decision. According to Deirdre et al. 2001, effective conflict management should balance organizational interests with the interests of the employee. In this case, management focused mainly on meeting operational needs with limited evidence of collaborative discussion before the conflict escalated. I believe a more collaborative approach would have been more effective. Management could have introduced earlier communication, negotiation, and collaborative problem solving so that both parties could discuss their concerns and work towards a mutually acceptable solution. Finally, it is important to recognize that legal justification does not necessarily mean effective conflict management. Although management may have had valid operational reasons for the transfer, the employees' concerns were not effectively addressed, causing the conflict to escalate into a constructive dismissal dispute. To conclude, earlier consultation, open communication, negotiation, and collaborative problem solving could have reduced misunderstandings and prevented the conflict from escalating. When workplace conflicts are not managed effectively, they can increase tension, reduce communication, and weaken the relationship between employees and management. Therefore, organizations should focus not only on making appropriate management decisions, but also on using effective conflict management strategies that balance organizational objectives with employee interests. Thank you.
So we go to the HR alternative approach to handling the situation. For this session, I will explain my alternative approach as the HR manager. If I were the HR manager, I would first discuss the transfer with the employees before making the final decision. This allowed the employee to share their views and concerns. I will also consider personal factors such as family responsibility, traveling distance, transportation costs, and health conditions, because this factor may affect the employee ability to accept the transfer. If there are other suitable alternatives, I would consider those options first. However, if the transfer is still necessary, I will give the employee enough notice and provide support to help them adjust to the new workplace. By using this approach, the company can reduce misunderstanding, build employee trust, and show the employees' opinions HR value. According to Colquitt et al. 2021, employees are more likely to accept company decision when the process is fair, transparent, and respectful. So we go to recommendations for improvement and ethical responsibility of HR manager. Now, I will explain my recommendation for improvement and the ethical responsibility of HR manager. First, the company should have a clear and transparent employee transfer policy. The policy should include the reason for the transfer, approval procedures, notice period, employee rights, and the appeal process. This helps ensure fairness and reduce misunderstanding. Second, the company should introduce an internal review process before approving any transfer. This allows HR to check whether the transfer is really necessary, consider other alternatives, and ensure legal compliance. Next, HR manager should receive regular training in employment law, ethical leadership, conflict resolution, and communication skills. This training helps them make better decisions and manage workplace issues more effectively. Finally, HR managers have ethical responsibility to balance their company goals with employees' rights and well-being. Every decision should be fair, free from discrimination, and employees should have the opportunity to express their concern before the final decision is made. By following this recommendation, the company can build trust, improve employee relationship, create a positive working environment, and increase employees' acceptance of management decisions.
The case of Intan Suraya Hashim versus Concrete Engineering Product Berhad, this dispute began when CEPB transferred a senior accountant executive from Kuala Lumpur to Nilai. While management justified the move for operational efficiency, the employee viewed it as unfair and destructive, eventually resigning and filing a constructive dismissal claim under Section 20 of the Industrial Relations Act 1967. The case shows how limited communication and lack of consultation can intensify workplace conflict. Instead of resolving concern early, the issue escalated into the industrial court. This demonstrates that legal authority alone is not enough. Effective conflict management requires fairness and dialogue. Research highlights that problem-solving, negotiation, and cooperative communication are far more effective than relying solely on managerial prerogative. Had CEPB consulted the employee and considered her circumstances, trust could have been preserved and escalation avoided. For HR managers, this case is a reminder of their ethical duties to balance organizational efficiency with employee welfare. Clear transfer policy, fair procedure, and ongoing HR training in conflict resolution are essential to prevent disputes and reduce constructive dismissal claims. In the end, constructive dismissal cases are not just about authority, they are about how decisions are implemented and communicated. Fairness, transparency, and respect for employee dignity are the foundation of workplace harmony. By adopting collaborative techniques and ethical HR practice, organizations can achieve operational goals while maintaining employee trust and long-term stability. This case teaches us that true conflict management is not about winning in court, but about building fairness, trust, and dignity in the workplace.